Welcome to the Aaron Harber Show. This is part 2 of our special 2-part series with Republican candidates for their party's nomination for the United States Senate. Don't forget to vote on June 28th or by June 28th as well. 2 other candidates were invited to participate, John Kaiser and Darrell Glenn, and declined the opportunity. They were busy with other things, I guess. So I just want to make sure everybody knew that all are always welcome on the Aaron Harber Show. Joining me today, Jack Graham. Jack, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Aaron. Great to be with you.
My pleasure. Robert Blaha again.
Thank you.
And Ryan Frazier.
Good to be here.
All right, so one of the things that is fascinating me, I do want to talk about a lot of the national issues, and we touched on some of them in part 1. But this year, I've never seen such a mess when it came to the petition process. All 3 of you have petitioned to be on the ballot. In fact, except for one candidate, everyone who's gotten on the ballot has done so via the petition process, and we've had court cases. So what's going on, Ryan? And I'm just going to be blunt. What's the problem with the system that we're seeing today? And talk about your own personal experience.
Aaron, the system is broken. The rules are stuck in the last century, and frankly, I'm fighting to make sure every valid registered Republican that signed my petitions, that their voice counts. We have a system today that says that if you didn't quite put your right address because perhaps you transposed the numbers, or if you left the E off your Arapahoe County and you put that on there, we're going to throw it out because we're not quite sure that's you. And quite frankly, we've gone through this process. We've validated each one of these signatures. We know that they're real people, and we believe that they ought to count. And so we're fighting in the Supreme Court to fix a broken system. And frankly, for me, that's one of the reasons I'm running for United States Senate, is to fix a broken system. It's not working for everyday Coloradans. It's not working for Americans. And we believe at the end of the day, when the Supreme Court looks at the evidence that's been presented to the courts, that we in fact will have more than enough sufficient signatures to not only just be on the ballot, we're on the ballot, but to make sure every vote for us counts.
All right.
We're pulling for you.
Yeah.
We're pulling for you.
Thanks, Robert.
What's your take, Robert? And I know you have some fairly...
Well, can you say goat rodeo? It was probably the most mismanaged thing I've been affiliated around for a long time. I guess the best way to put it in context is that the court has a level that they call substantial compliance. That's what it takes to get on the ballot, to have voter intent actually heard. If you reach substantial compliance, you're on. We're on. And the reason we're on is because the courts looked at the situation, said that the Secretary of State, however that happened, put a bunch of protocols, rules, regulations, and overburden into the process, which resulted in us not making the ballot. Now let's talk about how the process works, though. You have to fill out all these petitions. There's a very thoughtful, pragmatic way that you have to do it. You turn them into the Secretary of State. There's kind of some pomp and circumstance about that when you turn it in. And then what happens is they take them down to the bowels of the building somehow. They load them in somebody's truck or whatever. They take them down to southern Colorado, down to Pueblo, where there are another group of bureaucrats that are also working for the bureaucrats that are here that process the paperwork and make a decision whether your petition counts. Now tell me something, does that make any sense? So the courts look at it, the courts look at our process, they go everything. Our process was run by Frank McNulty, a very well-known guy in this state. The court looked at the process and said, you are on the ballot. Now here's the analogy I would give you. You know, we're all familiar with football, right? So the situation on the field was a penalty was called. We went to the replay booth. The replay booth looked at the tape, and the tape said, first down. So it's just one of those things where you've got to call it out. You know, one of the things that I said earlier in this segment is one of the things I've done for the last 20 years is help companies fix big, broken bureaucracies. How broken is that? Whether it's the BLM or the EPA or the Secretary of State, if you have overburden that makes no sense, you need to attack it, and leadership attack that and make that go away.
All right, so one of the things you said is you felt the process was mismanaged. How do you feel it was mismanaged? What should Coloradans know that they don't know today?
I think what Coloradans need to know is that between us and the other individual, there was between 75 and 80,000 signatures. So 80,000 people petitioned to get us on in one way or another. To actually make that work, if you were making rules and regulations, those rules and regulations, what would they be? They would be made to substantial compliance. So you would make sure if you were delivering this product or service in our marketplace that we all live in, and everybody that's watching on, on TV right now, they would deliver it to a level of service that made sense. Why all the extra rules? Why all the extra regulation? Why people that if the stamp's not on the right place? Now, my daughter's sitting over there. My daughter's petition, her signature was thrown out. Now today, as we hit here, we heard that dead people were allowed to be on. We hear that the Secretary of State somehow knew that there was some very questionable, perhaps forged signatures that they allowed to get on. This thing goes, you can't make this up. You could not make this story up. You actually had to walk through it.
All right. What's your take, Jack? I mean, you petitioned on, and it seemed to me your process went smoother than anybody else's. Is that a fair statement or not?
It is. I had a different experience. I'm not a career politician. I was in business for 35 years. And so when we jumped into the process, I didn't know the rules. Our team didn't know the rules either. It was the first time anybody on our campaign team had ever gone through a petition process. And so we spent a whole lot of time, countless hours with the Secretary of State's office to understand the rules. And in the process of understanding the rules, it was clear to us that the whole process was designed to mitigate the risk of fraud and bad behavior out there. And it was made clear to us, here are the rules. If you don't follow the rules, signatures won't count. And if you miss by one signature, you won't get on the ballot. And if you miss by one, you're off. I mean, it was made clear. And so we took this very, very seriously. And I am really proud of the way our team executed. We did get through the process successfully without our petitions being challenged, and so.
Well, Jack, your petitions were challenged, though, weren't they?
No,
I mean, you had 10,000 signatures thrown off.
Well, we knew that was part of the process, that there were 22,000 signatures that we did collect, and we also knew that some of them were not going to be valid because they would have incorrect addresses, or they weren't registered Republicans, or there was the risk that someone could fraudulently forge a signature. And so knowing that, we said, getting 10,500 signatures is not the margin of error that I'm comfortable with. I want to make certain that knowing that some of them were going to be disqualified, that we were covering that risk, which is why we got 22,000 signatures.
Well, Jack, we turned in over 18,000. I think it's reasonable to say, Jack, that had you turned in second, third, or fourth, you'd be in our shoes right now.
You'd be sitting right here.
And the reality is
That's because the first person who turns in.
we have a system that says you got to rush to get them in instead of taking the allowed amount of time, right, to get them in to make sure they're done right. I turned in over 18,000.
All right, well, I just want to make sure people understand that whoever turns in his or her signatures first, those names, if they show up on subsequent petitions, are not counted.
Right. And we have a system that says.
Which actually, when you think about it, is kind of strange. Why can't you, you can sign.
Again, if you were designing this system, and you could not design a system that is any more flawed. And the reason I came out so strong about it is if we were in the public marketplace, and we took this and sold it in the private marketplace, it's okay to do this in the public marketplace. But the private marketplace on Monday, what would we have said? Leadership's got to go, process didn't work, didn't make sense, did not represent what the voter intent was, we've got to change the process. Somehow that's okay in politics.
Like this, Robert, Aaron, when 75%, or to make it further simple, 3 out of 4 people that went through a system all end up in court. If that doesn't tell you that there's something wrong with the system, I don't know what will. And so the reality for me, and I'm sure for Robert, and thankfully, Jack, you didn't have to go through this, is that these are real people. Well, in some cases, I know that there's some fraudulent ones out there, and I don't want to speak to
some of them weren't even real people, but those were approved.
Right.
But you're talking about the dead ones. I feel like we're in Chicago, but.
Well, thankfully we're in Colorado, and this is why we got to fix the system, and that's what we're fighting for, is because the system is not working. It's telling everyday Coloradans, your voice doesn't count. And that's not right. That's not the American way. That's not how we do it in Colorado.
And when we came out and we talked about this, to me, it wasn't about me. It was about all of us. It was about the almost 80,000 people that said, I want you on, I want you on, I want you on, I want you on. And the Secretary of State said, not so much. That system does not work.
All right.
Aaron, I would like to just interject, very quickly. I think it's important that we not throw the Secretary of State's office under the bus, because it's clear they did not have room to interpret the law. It was their job to enforce the law. And so they enforce the law according to the rules of the law.
They make the rules.
If the concept of, you met the standards substantially was going to be enforced, that was up to the courts. You're not going to get a perfect record from any office when you've got over 80,000 signatures to review. And so I think it's careful we not throw them under the bus.
All right. Well, and also in terms of the rules, some of the rules are statutory. So certainly it's...
Some of them are, and many of them are interpreted.
They do have room. There's nothing that prohibits the Secretary of State's office from conducting an administrative hearing or review. But they didn't have time, quite frankly, because the day after they certified our petitions was the next day they needed to certify the ballots.
Right.
So again, the system's broken.
And they actually had my reviews. They actually had my results for a period of time before they told us they had our results. So it just goes, like I said, goat rodeo.
We got to fight the bureaucracy. We're going to fix it.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with our candidates in just a moment.
Well, I actually served in uniform, supported operations in the Middle East and North Africa. I very much understand a lot of what's going on there today. I can tell you that we must destroy ISIS, and I'd much rather take the fight to ISIS than let ISIS bring the fight to us. So what does that mean? Well, I don't believe that it requires U.S. troops on the ground at this point. I do believe that in order to defeat ISIS, we must destroy their caliphate, their control over territory. You see, in order for them to have a legitimate caliphate, they must control territory, which they do today. By taking that territory, you take away their caliphate and their claim to existence. I believe we have to bolster the airstrikes, U.S.-led world coalition to do that. I believe we have to provide military advisors and equip the Sunni and Kurdish soldiers who actually are on the ground there so that they can fight and help win the war, if you will, win the battle on the ground in this area.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbertv.com.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. Find us on Facebook to get all the latest updates, see behind-the-scenes photos, and make comments and ask me questions. You can see episodes before their TV broadcast, so like the show today. Hi, I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. Because I've never done endorsements or commercials, people ask how are our programs funded, especially because we provide them as a public service to all our broadcast outlets. It's expensive to produce our show, whether we do them here in Denver or go to places such as Aspen, Washington, D.C., or even Iraq. The answer is we depend on contributions to support our work to bring you some of the nation's top opinion leaders. Individuals, businesses, foundations, and other nonprofits make tax-deductible contributions to the Democracy and Media Education Foundation to help allow us to continue to work for you. To find out more or to make a donation, just go to dmefd.org. The DMEF is a tax-exempt public charitable organization and has promised to dedicate 100% of every contribution to support our public affairs initiatives. If you believe as I do in the need for a forum which promotes civil discourse and mutually respectful discussion, I hope you'll decide to make a contribution today. I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. Find us on Facebook to get all the latest updates, see behind-the-scenes photos, and make comments and ask me questions. You can see episodes before their TV broadcast, so like the show today.
Join me and watch The Aaron Harber Show.
Watch The Aaron Harber Show.
Watch The Aaron Harber Show.
Watch the Aaron Harper Show.
Watch The Aaron Harber Show.
I'm Reverend Jesse Jackson. Watch the Aaron Harber Show and keep hope alive.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at www.harbertv.com.
Welcome back to the show. We're talking with the Republican candidates for their party's nomination for the United States Senate. So, Robert, ISIS, certainly a significant issue in America, the U.S. Senate. How do we defeat ISIS? What's your plan?
Well, we have to find them, root them out, and kill them. I mean, I actually called for an Article 1, Section 8, declaration of war on ISIS. Wrote an op-ed which was pretty widely published. And the reason I did is because when America declares war on an enemy, America stops fascism. America stops communism. America stops the Nazi movement. When we just do AUMFs, authorizations for military force, we put our troops at risk, and we've done it far too long. So The short answer is we don't really have a choice. They want to destroy our way of life. We have to find them. We really don't have a choice. We have to go after them.
All right, one of the things that we've had presidents get into the habit of is getting in wars, whether, basically pretty much undeclared, and not paying for those wars, not going to the American people and saying, we're going to do this, this is what it's going to cost. Would you be willing as a U.S. Senator to say to the American people, this is what I want to do, this is how much it's going to cost, and here's how we're going to pay for it?
That's a very good question, because that is exactly what you're forced to do if you do a declaration of war. You have to spell it out to the American people and sell it to the American people, as opposed to what we've been doing for the last couple decades.
Jack, are you in favor of that?
You know, I am. I think it's very important that the American people be part of this decision, because if we're not all part of the decision, if we're not all in, we're a divided country. And a divided country does not work nearly as effectively. Getting the alignment of the American people, not only that we're going to go fight this war, this is what it's going to cost, but in addition, this is what the end game is. This is how we're going to defeat the enemy, and this is what we're going to leave behind, that we're not going to be back into the nation building business, which I think has been a really expensive lesson learned for us over the last 15 years, not just in terms of money, but more importantly in terms of human lives. And so I'm all in that regard, Aaron.
How about you, Ryan?
Well, I actually served in uniform, supported operations in the Middle East and North Africa. I very much understand a lot of what's going on there today. I can tell you that we must destroy ISIS, and I'd much rather take the fight to ISIS than let ISIS bring the fight to us. So what does that mean? Well, I don't believe that it requires U.S. troops on the ground at this point. I do believe that in order to defeat ISIS, we must destroy their caliphate, their control over territory. You see, in order for them to have a legitimate caliphate, they must control territory, which they do today. By taking that territory, you take away their caliphate and their claim to existence. I believe we have to bolster the airstrikes, U.S.-led world coalition to do that. I believe we have to provide military advisors and equip the Sunni and Kurdish soldiers who actually are on the ground there so that they can fight and help win the war, if you will, or win the battle on the ground in this area. But in doing that, that's ultimately what will lead us to taking that territory, and when us meaning the world community, so that we can eliminate the threat of ISIS. But I will just take a step back for a second and remind folks that even when we defeat ISIS, and I expect we will, that does not deal with the overall issue of terrorism. That is a broader issue that requires diplomatic, military, and economic solutions ultimately to dealing with that. When you look at the expansion of militant extremism across the Middle East and North Africa, throughout Africa, we see Boko Haram right now that is seeking to expand its presence in Africa. This is an issue that is much broader than just ISIS. But I agree and believe we must destroy ISIS as the more immediate threat to Western civilization and our way of life.
Do you think it's fair to say our original invasion of Iraq was a mistake?
Well, I think it's fair to say, and we can certainly debate that, Aaron. What I think it's fair to say is that our departure, too soon, quite frankly, of that area, left a vacuum in that region that I believe ultimately led to the emergence of ISIS. And that, in fact, is why ISIS exists today. We can debate about whether we should have went in or not. That decision was made.
If you had a choice of reversing that decision, of going back in time and reversing that decision, would you do that or not?
Based on what I know now, I would have had more reservations about going into Iraq.
Robert, how about you?
Could I make a comment about the
Yeah, but I'd like first tell me, if you could reverse that decision, would you?
Well, anytime you look hindsight, anytime you look in the rearview mirror, you might come up with a different.
Well, would you? That's the whole point of learning from your mistakes.
Knowing what you know now, you would have done it differently. I'm not sure you would have done it the same way we did it. Obviously, the way we did it didn't work.
Right.
But I want to comment on the how-to, because the senior military people I'm talking to are telling me that to the point that Ryan was making, that you need to do this on a global basis. You can't just put American lives at risk. But America does have some of the best special forces in the world. And a lot of this could be done through special forces and through very specific strategic acts, as opposed to a broad ground game of any kind. And so
I think that's what you're seeing is being done now.
Exactly. And so the more you could, but if we were to go this step further and declare war, and then build a coalition, we could get the best and the brightest from 25 to 50 different countries, get very strategic. And this is something that's going on around the world. It's not just an American problem. This is a global problem.
You get the last word on this before we break for our last segment, Jack.
You know, an uncomfortable conversation very few people want to have is the fact that if you're going to operate in the international markets in the global community, you're going to do business with some pretty unsavory people. And Saddam Hussein was a very unsavory character. The weapons of mass destruction risk that existed then and the beliefs that we had around that is what drove us to go into Iraq. And I must admit that I favored our invasion of Iraq at the time. And today I have a very different opinion. I do think that was a bad decision on our part. It was a lesson learned. I don't think there were bad intentions around that. At the same time, you know, I think about Mubarak in Egypt. I think about Assad in Syria. I think about Gaddafi in Libya. These are very unsavory people, but they do stabilize the region. And do we really want to go and occupy those countries to solve those problems in the way that we have historically? My response to that is no. Let's find alternative solutions to those kinds of challenges.
All right, we're going to take our last break, and we'll be back with our candidates in just a moment.
I would say there's a number of things we need to do. We need to fix a very broken tax system. We need to look at what we're doing as far as encouraging people to take work offshore. So we need to move the tax rates at the top level down to the place where we bring actually jobs back to the U.S.
And you're talking especially about corporate tax.
Corporate and individual. Corporate individual. So I like a flat tax idea. I mean, our corporate rate now is in the high 35 to plus %. We need to get that down in the low 20s, and we need to get the individual tax returns down to the place where they're probably in the high teens. Well, the only way you do that is you have to simplify the system.
Your opinions, ideas, suggestions, and criticisms related to guests, topics, questions, or the host are welcome. Please send an email to producer@harbertv.com.
Hi, I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. For information about the program, who our upcoming guests and topics are, and ways you can participate, please go to our website. That's harbertv.com. And most of all, thanks for watching. I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. I very much would like to hear from you about the program, so please send me an email with your thoughts. You can suggest what topics I should cover, what guests I should invite to be on the show, or even what specific questions you would like me to ask. This is your program, so send your suggestions to aaron@harbertv.com. I promise to personally read every one, so email me today. And most of all, thanks for watching. Hi, I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. It's tough for me to limit myself to 140 characters, but you can see how well I do by following the show on Twitter. Follow me at @Aaron Harber.
To obtain a DVD copy of this program, please contact info@harbertv.com.
Welcome back to the show. This is our final segment in part 2 of our 2-part series with the Republican candidates for their party's nomination. Don't forget to vote on by June 28th. So, Jack, I'm going to start with you. Do you believe that mankind is responsible for a significant portion of climate change?
You want a one-word answer?
I want a yes or a no.
Significant is the wrong word. We contribute to it. There's no question climate change is taking place, and that deserves a very lengthy conversation because of the significance on our energy policy.
All right, we'll have that another time. Robert?
I would say partially.
Oh, well, that's a definitive answer.
Well, you said you only give us one word.
I believe man has contributed.
All right, good. With one of the issues that's generally not discussed is the fact that the use of fossil fuels is contributing to ocean acidification. And because of the markers in the fossil fuels we use, there's no scientific dispute that it is actually that fossil fuel use that is contributing to that. And the oceans, of course, produce about 85% of our fresh oxygen, key component, if not the key component in the food chain. Is there something you think we need to do to address ocean acidification, or it's just too big a problem for us to take on?
Well, I think, Aaron, that we can look at what can be done and how we can further move towards efforts towards renewables and things like that will reduce the contribution that mankind makes towards any sort of climate change. But I think in doing that, we have to have a balanced conversation about what types of policy changes we can take and how we can move towards an all-of-the-above energy policy that allows us to continue to grow our economy. What I'm saying is that we shouldn't do it at the expense of one energy sector or another, or for that matter, at the expense of our economy. We have to be responsible about it.
Robert, anything you want to add to that?
I think the science is advancing every year. Sustainability is something we should look at, and it's important.
Jack, last comment on this issue.
What you said is accurate, Aaron. The acidification process is taking place. I think the operative question is how fast and how severe. And the consensus, I sat on the board of the National Center for Atmospheric Research for over a decade, the advisory board, so I was exposed to these conversations. And what the consensus view of the atmospheric scientists is that yes, climate change, yes, the acidification process is taking place. It's not going to take place fast. It will take place over decades, if not centuries. And it will not be severe. That means we are responsible for this. We have to address it. Let's use innovation and research and development, and anything that's on the table that advances cleaner solutions, more efficient solutions, cheaper solutions, we ought to pursue.
Okay, the national debt, some of you have referenced the fact that we're heading towards a $20 trillion national debt. Robert, what do you think is a solution to that? If you're in the U.S. Senate, what would you do to get control of that?
Wow, I mean, that's a one-sentence answer.
Yeah, you got 3 seconds.
I would say there's a number of things we need to do. We need to fix a very broken tax system. We need to look at what we're doing as far as encouraging people to take work offshore. So we need to move the tax rates at the top level down to the place where we bring actually jobs back to the U.S.
And you're talking especially about corporate tax.
Corporate and individual. So I like a flat tax idea. I mean, our corporate rate now is in the high 30, 35 to plus %. We need to get that down in the low 20s, and we need to get the individual tax returns down to the place where they're probably in the high teens. Well, the only way you do that is you have to simplify the system. The only way you simplify the system is you have to blow up the tax code. We need to go after the tax code. We need to make that. And I'll add one other thing. I'm trying to respect your time here. The other thing we need to do is the number that a lot of the wonks use, or someplace we have between $3 and $4 trillion parked offshore. Okay,
You're talking about corporate assets.
I'm talking any asset. It could be through corporate inversion. It could be however, but it's parked offshore. But it got there legally. Important point. It got there legally. We need to grandfather that money, and we need to get it back on shore, and we need to get it working, because quantitative easing, which is the direction we went, does not work.
Jack, what's your take on that?
You know, I think we need to educate Congress, and we need to educate the American people. This is real risk to our country. We spend $400 billion a year just to service the debt on that $20 trillion, $19 trillion. That's at a 2.1% interest rate. It's 13% of our budget. That plus the entitlement program, Social Security, Medicare, consumes in total 68% of our budget, leaving 32% for everything else. If interest rates go to 5%, and they will go back up, interest rates go back up. If they go to 5%, now between our entitlement programs and the cost of our debt, we will be consuming 87% of our total budget, leaving 13% for everything else. That won't even cover the cost of defense, not to mention Homeland Security and roads and transportation.
All right. You get the last word, Ryan.
I think it's, quite frankly, un-American to continue to level this amount of debt on the backs of our children, many of which have yet to even be born. And that's what we're doing, and that's not the responsible way. I believe there are two things that would need to happen, and I'll generalize because we don't have the time to go into all the detail, but one, we have to grow our economy. So we need policies that unleash good American jobs and get people back to work in our country, more people working, greater revenues being generated. And two, we have to control spending and actually balance our budget. This is why I support a balanced budget amendment or requirement that says we will learn to live within our means. If we do those two things, we can get our fiscal house in order, and we can tell future generations, you don't have to pay off that endless amount of debt.
All right. I want to thank my guests, Jack Graham, Robert Blaha, and Ryan Frazier, for joining me today. Of course, make sure you watch part 1 of the special 2-part series, and go to the candidates' websites that you see on your screens to get more information about their campaigns. Most importantly, make sure you vote and get your ballot in by June 28th. I'm Aaron Harber. Thanks for watching.
Please contact us. We want to hear from you. And thanks for watching.